Welcome to the Glendale Water and Power Commission meeting of September 8th, 2008. May we have roll?
Commissioner Chan? Present. Commissioner Abrahamian? Present. Commissioner Foley? Present. Commissioner Yao? Present. Commissioner Miller?
Present. Let's see, our next item is the consent items. And we have the minutes for the August 4th, 2008 meeting. Is there a motion to accept those, or were there any amendments?
I move to accept.
Is that seconded? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? So it's hereby concluded that the minutes are accepted. Our next item are reports and information, and we have the General Manager, Mr. Steiger.
Thank you, Chairman Miller. I'd like to give you a very brief update on our strategic planning process. It is progressing quite well since the last meeting. The design team has met 7 times to put together the framework for the plan. We're now into the employee interaction piece of the process, where we're involving about 2/3 of the employee base of GWP through 2-hour workshops. And we've now done 5 of those, and we're scheduling 2 a day, and it's quite rewarding, and I think it's progressing very, very well. So that part will be finished in approximately 2 to 2.5 weeks. We've also implemented a number of different interviews, yourselves, for example, some of our larger customers, and some of the other stakeholders that we've identified. So the process is working quite well. We're on schedule. We expect to have the full plan probably early November, as we've said all along, and we're on schedule for that. So we will continue to update you next month as to where we are, and then hopefully sometime in November we'll have the full plan to roll out.
Well, I'd like to commend you, Mr. Steiger, and the staff for working on that. That's a very important effort, and it'll guide Glendale Water and Power in the future in being fiscally responsible and meeting its mission.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda, unfortunately, Keisha Fulton was not able to be here today to talk about the Relay for Life, so we're going to postpone that, if you don't mind. And it is my pleasure at this point to honor a 40-year veteran of the city of Glendale, but I'll just say GWP because he's one of ours. And I'd like to ask Mark Felker to up.
Welcome.
First of all, Mark, congratulations on 40 years with the city of Glendale.
Thank you.
It's an amazing feat.
Yeah, I know. I'm barely 40.
I'd like to just recount your history. You started with GWP in '68.
Yes.
Okay, I was sophomore in college in '68. So I'm in maintenance and hole digging crews. You actually dug holes.
Yeah, in the middle of about 115 degrees. So that was an eye opener.
I imagine it was.
Yeah.
That was digger trucks.
Yeah.
Promoted to meter reader in the customer services section, also in '68. Transferred to Public Works in '69 as an engineering aide. As in survey for 3 years, surveying the hillsides, existing streets, before and after construction, sewers, storm drains, and sidewalks. And in that regard, you and I have the exact same history. That's what I was doing in 1962, being a surveyor. Yeah.
Oh.
I often wonder if it would have been a better take. Nonetheless, in '72, you were promoted to engineering aide and worked in Public Works until '77, updating drawing maps, issuing permits for sewers, house moving, and assisted customers at the counter, which is very, very important. In '77, '78, you're transferred to the Parks Department as a draftsman, assistant engineering technician. There you prepared renderings and presentation drawings and maps for park facilities, landscape and irrigation systems.
I learned a lot in there.
Sure.
Every place I've moved to, I've learned.
Also, Proposition 13 eliminated the draftsman position for the Parks Department. A turning point in your career.
Well, that's why I had to come back to the meter reader. It's the only person I could bump.
Oh. And here I thought you wanted to be with us. Okay. But in 78, you returned as a meter reader in that position until 79. In 79, reinstated to assistant engineering tech in GWP engineering section, and has since been promoted within the engineering to a series of positions. I'm going to ask Ramon to take it from here. But I do want to say one thing. Honestly, Mark was the first person who came up to me and talked to me a bit about things when I first got here, believe it or not, and offered to take me around and show me what he does. And I've yet to take you up on that offer, but I will.
Okay.
Just haven't had the opportunity. But I do appreciate that, and I appreciate you being the first.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah. We can still do that.
Oh, we will do that, yes.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that Mrs. Debbie Falco is here, as well as Mark's mom, Mrs. Falco, and they're here to support Mark. Before I continue with his work experience, just to let you know that Mark is a father of 9. He has 14 grandchildren. I think that's why he's working for a long time to stay away from home, not to babysit, but that's my opinion. Anyway, one of the things that I was asking Mark, one of the things that we can share with you, when he went on vacation to Ireland, he shared a lot of pictures. He said, have you gone to any other vacations? And he shared a story with me that if you see the movie, I think it's called Miss Sunshine.
Little Miss Sunshine.
Little Miss Sunshine. Have you guys seen the movie, the VW bus? They always get out to start it and push to start it. He told me a story that they had vacation once with the family in front of the White House where this VW bus that they had wouldn't start. And they had to get out, the whole family push it out in order to start it. So if you imagine the movie, Little Miss Sunshine, and Mark's family pushing it, it's a picture of a good family life, is the way I see it. So, but anyway, with that, from 1986 to 2002, he served with us as an engineering technician, and then from 2002 he promoted to an electric service planner. Electric service planner, I would have to say, is probably one of the most stressful jobs that we have here, because you're dealing with the customers trying to design their services, and they always want their service right now. And so he tries to manage and coordinates not only with the customer, but as well with our crew, just to make sure that everyone stays happy. And Mark is actually doing us a big favor right now. One of the jobs he did back in 86,
86 up to 2002.
well, he was doing some marking, USA marking. Those of you that are familiar, before any contractor could open up the streets, we have to mark it. Mark has been filling in that role now for the past several months.
9 months.
For 9 months, until we can figure out what to do with that position. With his experience, is helping us train new guys that's researching and trying to market. In fact, if he looks tired, he had to start at 4 o'clock in the morning to help out with a job site to Mark. So if he looks sleepy, that's what it is. Anyway, with that, I'd like to present to you Mark Felko for his 40 years. Truly appreciate it, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I'd like to present the certificate of recognition to Mark, and it's very nice. Mark's colleagues have all made little notes around the edges,
Great.
and I think that's
Great.
very, very
That's
nice.
nice.
And Mark will also be recognized in front of the City Council. So,
Couple
Mark,
weeks.
Yeah,
Thank you very
congratulations.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Congratulations. Where are you working right now in the organization then?
Well, like Ramon said, I kind of picked up where I left off about 5 years ago.
Okay.
And I think of it more as I protect the underground electrical substructure.
Mhm.
And in doing that, we have to research the plans and make sure that the contractors know where the electrical is or isn't, so that they don't end up tearing things up. And Ramon said the service planner is stressful. No, this is stressful. You're dealing with contractors cars in the street, a lot of different things that are sort of unknown, and a lot of times the plans are very good, but sometimes they deviate from the plans, and you have to just kind of go with it and expect that you're going to have a good outcome on it. So the other day I was over at DreamWorks twice trying to help them out. So we're all over the city, up in the mountains and all over. So it's a lot of fun. I guess I wouldn't be doing it otherwise.
Well, thanks for sharing all the information. On behalf of the entire commission, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Now I'd like to introduce Michael Garcia, who will give a review of the Brown Act.
Mike, could you make sure that the microphone is on?
Yeah, it's on. Members of the Commission, good afternoon. My name is Michael Garcia. I'm the Chief Assistant City Attorney. And as part of our job with the city, we do provide, as frequently as we think is necessary, updates on legal developments or laws that pertain to our various commissions. And this is a presentation that we've given to a number of the commissions this year. As the law changes or as we get new commissioners on board on a commission, we think it's a good idea to provide an update to you. What I'm going to discuss this afternoon is a summary of the Brown Act, or the open meetings law that governs our process here, as well as give a brief summary of some parliamentary procedures that we use in the city to make sure that the actions of each commission are properly recorded, and also to make sure that there's a clear record of what's going on. To start off, I'll discuss the Brown Act. The Brown Act is a little bit over 50 years old now. I don't think a lot of people realize that. It started when a San Francisco Chronicle newspaper reporter wrote an expose on local government and how the majority of their decisions were taking place behind closed doors without the benefit of public input. And as a result of that, the legislature adopted the Brown Act. There have been many changes to it over the years, but this one sentence actually stayed the same throughout the time that it's been adopted. And it's basically two essential requirements: that all meetings of the legislative body of a city, and I'll discuss what a legislative body is in a second, must be open to the public, and all members of the public must be permitted to attend those meetings and give their input. And there's a last clause, except as otherwise permitted. That's to discuss closed sessions, and I'll briefly go over that. There's no real need to discuss that in depth. The Brown Act governs legislative bodies, and what that means, it's the governing body of our agency, as well as any commission, board, or committee that's appointed by a formal action of the legislative body. So obviously it applies to our city council, our redevelopment agency, and all the other commissions such as GWP, the Planning Commission, etc. So all those committees must comply with the rules of the Brown Act, and that's why we have our meetings here in public, and we actually go above and beyond what a lot of jurisdictions do by putting our meetings not only on GTV6, but also we have them available for future viewing on the web, or continuous viewing and future viewing on the internet. There is one exception to the Brown Act. In other words, an ad hoc committee, which is a committee made up of less than a quorum of a particular body. So 2 members of this commission, for example, can meet if their jurisdiction is of limited scope. So if, for example, a city council were to create a standing committee like a finance committee, that would not be subject to this exception. The only type of exceptions, the only types of committees that are not required to comply with the Brown Act is if a committee or the council creates a subcommittee to deal with one specific issue that's of limited duration, so that it can perhaps report back to the bigger body. And that is the only exception for committees to comply with the Brown Act. Now, the Act governs meetings, and that is defined in the Brown Act very specifically as a congregation at the same time and place of a majority of the members of the body to hear, discuss, or deliberate on an item. And I underline those terms because those terms are construed very broadly. It doesn't just govern the final decision that a legislative body may make, but it's any type of a meeting where you discuss items that are before your jurisdiction, or even if it's just to gather facts on something that's under your jurisdiction. And lastly, the last element of what a meeting is, it has to govern something that's within the subject matter jurisdiction of that body. So, for example, if this commission were, for some reason, in a room together and we're discussing something not related to GWP, but maybe something broader city issue, it would not necessarily be a meeting of the GWP commission because it's not within your jurisdiction. So if you're discussing maybe a planning item that had no relation to GWP at all, that would not necessarily be a Brown Act meeting. Because it's relatively easy to, or it was when the Brown Act was first adopted, to get around the requirements of the Brown Act by holding serial meetings. The Brown Act was amended after its initial adoption to prohibit serial meetings, which are the use of either intermediaries or technological devices to develop a collective concurrence. And I'll go through some examples that will kind of explain the dangers and pitfalls of serial meetings. Here's one example. If, for example, a commissioner speaks to another commissioner, Commissioner B, and then Commissioner B talks to Commissioner C and relates to them some aspect of what Commissioner A was thinking on a particular issue that's before you, then this would be a serial meeting which could violate the Brown Act. Another example is if one member speaks to more than one other member of the committee, and again speaks to them about issues that pertain to the Commission's jurisdiction. Also violates the Brown Act if it's not part of a regularly noticed and agendized meeting. And another example is occasionally this might happen too, is where either a staff member or a third party either intentionally or inadvertently acts as an intermediary, explaining to one commissioner or more than one commissioner what other commissioners are thinking on a particular issue. Again, if this occurs in such a manner that the members are learning how their colleagues are intending to vote or intending to decide on a particular issue, that's where the danger lies with respect to potential for Brown Act violations. That's why we always encourage open discussions at the meetings themselves, and that we don't go down the slippery slope. And again, serial meetings, the prohibition on serial meetings has to do with prohibiting action to be taken through a third party, through an intermediary, or through, for example, chain emails that often give rise to potential for serial meetings. And an action taken specifically defined in the statute, and it's essentially anything that can lead to a collective decision or can lead to getting there to the collective decision of the body. Any conversation, whether it be by email, by phone, by in-person contact that facilitates a member's understanding of an issue or facilitates an agreement amongst the committee members or advances the ultimate resolution could result in a Brown Act, a meeting which could run afoul of the Brown Act. Here's, I think, this was a typical example of some of the types of serial meetings that could occur. The first one is not really a serial meeting. It's just one commissioner speaking to another, hey, this is how I'm thinking about voting on this proposed ordinance. But you see by the second example, if Commissioner A tells Commissioner B, I've got C and D lined up, then you can see how Commissioner B starts to learn how the rest of the commission's meeting, and that would be a violation of the Brown Act unless that was occurring right here as part of this meeting. There was some clarification of the law 2 years ago. The Attorney General had taken the position that individual briefings, whether be the attorney or the general manager, giving an individual briefing to an individual commissioner could run afoul of the Brown Act. Most of the city attorney community felt that was a little bit too strict of a reading, unnecessarily abridged the ability of the staff to have conversations with its commissioners. And so a case went to court, and that court ruled that individual briefings are permitted, as long as the staff member is not conveying to the commissioners they're speaking to what the views of the other commissioners are. It's very important that those discussions be information being relayed to the commissioners. Commissioners can obviously relay their concerns or their issues back to the staff member, but there cannot be a discussion of how other commissioners are voting or what they're thinking about a particular policy that might be before you. This case actually involved a situation where the chief of police in the city of Fremont was going to adopt a false alarm policy, and the city manager in that city just provided individual updates to the council members about what the chief was going to be doing. And then the issue arose at a council meeting, and it was clear at that council meeting that some of the council members knew how some of the other council members felt about that. And as a result, this case was allowed to go to trial. But again, the principal holding of that case was that individual briefings are permitted. Again, the whole key here, when we're talking about trying to avoid collective concurrence, trying to avoid the serial meetings, is to just try to avoid developing a collective concurrence, whether it's directly by talking to commissioners or by talking to staff, or maybe you're talking to a third party who's got some matter that's before you. And we tell the staff, obviously, to be very clear about not providing or disclosing the views that the commissioners have to other commissioners. One last sort of warning, now that we use email as an effective tool, and this is not meant to discourage in any way the use of email, we often, I know with the commissions that I serve, information is often forwarded to the commissions. It's an easy way for you to get information, updates, maybe updates on legislative things. Again, that's permissible, but we just be careful about hitting that reply all button or trying to make sure that other commissioners are not, that there doesn't become a discussion via email, because that would be a violation of the Brown Act. Okay, there are some, and I think this is important for our commissions, because there are a lot of types of gatherings that are not meetings, and I think it's important that you are aware of them. Obviously, a conference that's open to the public, where general issues that are before that conference are discussed. It's permissible for, obviously, a majority of you to be at a conference like that, so long as you're not discussing at the conference maybe a particular issue that will be coming before you as a commission. Another exception, I think, probably applies to this commission, applies to a lot of our commissions, are community organized meetings that are open and publicized. Often we may have members of the public or organizations that have meetings. Now this one exception is pretty narrow. It applies when a member of the community or a organization puts on an event where they might invite commission members. If the city itself is holding this community meeting, it is also subject to the requirements of the Brown Act. So if the city itself is hosting a meeting out in the community, it's important that we don't have a majority there in attendance to hear the items that are being discussed at that meeting. Another example we already discussed is individual contacts with third persons. Attendance at an open and noticed meeting of another local agency or another board is exempt. So obviously if there's something related to water and power that comes before the council, a majority of this commission may come to the meeting. If the views of the commission members has been requested and you want to come and voice what some of those concerns are, that's permissible, again, as long as you're not discussing amongst yourselves something that's not part of that scheduled program. Another exception, obviously, is social ceremonial occasions. And then the last exception we talked earlier is less than a quorum of the board. So a couple of you can get together if you want to talk about a particular issue. That's permissible. Again, as long as you don't go to another commissioner and say, hey, I talked to the commissioner so and so, and this is what we discussed. Now, if you have a meeting, when the commission does meet, there are requirements for the requirements of these meetings that we have here, right now. Obviously, this is a regular meeting of the commission. Your regular meetings, the date and time is set by either a ordinance or a resolution. When you have your regular meetings, the agenda for that meeting must be made available 72 hours before the meeting, and it must be posted. All our commission meeting notices are posted downstairs as you walk in. Each commission of the city can have a special meeting, and that requires a 24-hour notice. And sometimes what you may have is you might have a regular meeting, you might need to add something, and you can always do within 24 hours. You can always add a special meeting notice to add that additional item to your agenda. Emergency meetings, not really used that often, but again, There's an exception if there's some reason for it. It usually applies to the council. If there's some emergency that the council needs to meet, if there's a natural disaster, that sort of thing, that can be exercised. The agendas for our meetings must be posted in a place accessible to the public 24/7. That's why our notices are published in the public area downstairs. Anybody who requests a copy of the agenda and the packet for our meetings can make a request in writing to get a copy of that, and then their written request is good for a year. Obviously, our agendas do have some basic requirements. You must have a brief general description of what items you're going to be discussing at your particular meetings. The statute says that generally 20 words is sufficient. I've seen some cities go very lengthy descriptions, but that's not really necessary. So if you ever see that, just as long as it's a reasonable person can read it and say, okay, they're going to be discussing these items today. I can come and speak on them. That's sufficient. And again, I already spoke to the agendas being posted in a place that's publicly accessible. There is a prohibition in the Brown Act which prohibits the discussion or taking action on matters that are not part of your agenda. So obviously, there may be somebody may make a request at oral communications, or some item may come up that's not a part of your agenda. That may not be discussed at your meeting, other than obviously someone, for example, comes to the meeting and says, I want the commission to discuss water rates. And it's not a part of your agenda. You can discuss putting it on the agenda for the next meeting, maybe what should be on the agenda, and then that'll come up. But again, all those types of things have to be very, very brief as a response to a comment. Also, brief announcements that the commissioners may have is also an exception to that rule. One other exception to that rule is if there is a need to act on something immediately, and that need arose after the posting of the agenda, then by 4/5 vote, the commission may vote to put that item on the agenda, and then take action on it. It's a rare exception, not used frequently, but that is there. If there's some need to take action immediately, you can do so. And keeping in mind that you also have, because you have the ability to hold special meetings and that sort of thing, it really needs to be a special circumstance to act on something that is not part of your agenda. When I showed the very first sentence of the original provision of the Brown Act, it talked about the public having the right to be at your meetings. Part and parcel of that is that we cannot require, as a condition of attendance, that people register or sign in. We can't have a sign-in sheet, but we must, if we do such a thing, we must disclose that that's purely voluntary. And the second part of that is obviously people must have the opportunity to address you as part of your meeting. They must be able to speak on any matter that's on the agenda, and then there must be a part of your agenda where people can speak to any matter that's within your subject matter jurisdiction. That must occur at every regular meeting. If you have a special meeting, the members of the public must be able to speak to any item that's on that agenda specifically, although your special meeting agendas do not need to have a general oral communications provision. And there's also a limited exception to this, which provides that if a subcommittee of your entire commission has acted on something, then the larger body does not need to take public comment before acting on that particular case. I'm not sure if this body has subcommittees, but if you did, then that would be an exception that could be utilized. Obviously, with the right to come and speak to the commission comes the right of the public to criticize the policies, procedures, programs, or services of the agency. My boss, Scott Howard, calls this the thick skin rule. If you put yourself out there to be on a commission and take some actions, obviously there's going to be some criticism, and that you have to be able to take that. Now, truly personal attacks are outside the jurisdiction of this body or of any of our commissions, so that would be outside the scope, but there's a wide latitude to criticize the policies and procedures and decisions that you all make. Another right that the public has is to tape or broadcast a meeting, to set up and broadcast, tape the meeting or broadcast it, unless it's going to be so distracting that it's going to affect the ability of the commission to undertake its work. I'll have to tell you that it would have to be a truly a distracting presence for it to meet that level. I mean, you're talking about if you had multiple cameras here or something, you might be able to have the right to limit it to a few cameras or that sort of thing. But if one person wants to come and set up, as long as they're not blocking the view of the other audience members and they're not otherwise distracting the meeting, they will have the right to do that. With the Brown Act comes the right of the public to have records that are part of your meetings and have the right to access those writings. Anything that's distributed to you as commission members also has to be made available to the public unless it's otherwise exempt by law. For example, if there's the clearest example I can always think of is if legal counsel writes a confidential legal memorandum to you, that would not be subject to disclosure. But generally, the staff reports, the comments that maybe members of the public give to the staff to pass on to you, also available to any other member of the public. If anything's distributed inside the 72-hour period after you've received the agendas, any new materials, that also has to be made available to the public. And obviously, any materials that are submitted to you as a commission and to the public has to also be made available in alternative formats upon request. So if somebody's sight impaired or hearing impaired, they have to be able to get the materials in a medium that they can comprehend the materials. The meetings generally, there's some additional rules with respect to meetings. One of the basic rules is that meetings typically have to occur inside our jurisdictional limits, but there are some exceptions, such as if we have to view property that we own or facilities that we own. I know we have some facilities outside the state that provide us with power, and I think it's permissible to have that. If you're going to have a meeting, you can't have it outside the jurisdiction. But again, that would be subject to the requirement that you meet all the other requirements of the Brown Act, which is you have your meeting open and noticed, etc. Another exception is that generally the meetings must take place in a place like this, but in the council chambers or one of our city facilities. But one or more commissioners may teleconference if they're out of town. But again, that teleconference location must be open to the public and must be posted, and people from the public must be able to know where the commissioner that's out of town or teleconference, where that commissioner is and where they're listening to the meeting. I know there's a councilman in Pasadena who is frequently taking his meetings from Hawaii, so he has the hotel name and everything is all there, and any member of the public who wants to go to Hawaii and sit in with that council member has the right to do so. Meetings also must meet the protections of the ADA. And lastly, secret ballots are prohibited, whether it be on a vote to appoint a chairperson or to take any action. Secret ballots are even if it's to get an initial straw poll. All votes must take place in public, and all votes of each commissioner shall be known to the public. Again, there is an exception to the requirement that meetings be open and public. There are specific exceptions for closed session. I will tell you. Here's the summary. Typically speaking, the commissions themselves do not go into closed session because generally it's, for example, litigation and real estate. It's the body that has the right to make the ultimate decision that goes into closed session. So usually that's either our city council or our redevelopment agency. But I just wanted you to be aware of them in case you had some questions. The Brown Act does provide penalties for violations. The general thrust of the Brown Act is to have meetings in the public, so it's not a punitive statute. The intent is to get compliance. So in the event there was an error in a Brown Act procedure, the commission or body or council that maybe made the error or is alleged to have made the error has the opportunity to cure that defect before any sort of action can be taken, before there could be a civil action filed or before criminal action can be filed. There are civil actions to challenge Brown Act violations. There's also attorney's fee provision in the event that the public agency has been found to be in violation of the Brown Act. In other words, a plaintiff who brings an action against a public agency would have the right to attorney's fees if he or she was successful in that action. There's also a criminal penalty for intentionally depriving the information of the public. To our knowledge, nobody's actually been successfully prosecuted under there. It is meant, though, to discourage somebody from intentionally trying to deprive the public of information. From our experience, you see throughout throughout California, if there are violations, they're usually unintentional, or they're a question of interpretation as far as whether or not something should go into closed session. So oftentimes you'll see somebody, an agency, cure that defect, even if they don't feel there was actually a violation of procedure there. So that's the basic summary of the Brown Act. If there are any questions, I'll just jump right into parliamentary procedure. This is.
I did have a couple of questions.
Sure.
On your last slide, you mentioned there's no known case of criminal prosecution for intentional deprivation of information to public. Do you mean no case in the United States or to the state?
No, I meant
or
in
just
California.
In California,
Yeah.
okay. All right. And then on your third to the last slide, you mentioned the meetings outside jurisdiction under limited circumstances. Outside jurisdiction, I take it to mean the city.
Right,
boundaries.
outside the city of Glendale.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. I have an additional question about third party. Like one commission tells Commissioner B, and then B tells Commissioner C something.
Yeah.
How do you remedy that? I mean, sometimes mistakes happen if you just at certain functions where you mention certain things. And do we have to notify the public that took place?
Well, the purpose of this training really is to get you familiar with that, so that doesn't actually occur. Right. If there actually was something that occurred, that did occur, then obviously the one remedy, the best remedy is to actually then hold a meeting and actually discuss that in open and public, so that members of the public have the opportunity to fully hear the issue, and then so the entire commission has the opportunity to hear what all the commissioners think on a particular issue. So that's the advice we would give. But again, the purpose of this is to get you familiar with, if you're talking to someone about a particular issue, one of your fellow commissioners, and you've already spoken to one commissioner, to make sure to be careful not to, in your conversations with another commissioner, say, by the way, this is what I heard the other commissioner is thinking about doing on that action. That's the best you can do. Any other questions? Brown Act? Briefly, then, I'll just touch on some parliamentary procedure. Here in Glendale, we do use Robert's Rules of Order. We use them more as a guide to conducting our meetings. The purpose here is really to establish a record of the business that you're undertaking, so that it's clear to the person taking the minutes, to the people in the public, exactly what you're doing, what the motion on the table is, so they know what they can speak to. Motions generally, they just they need to be concise but complete at the same time, so that so that your staff also knows what exactly direction that you've given them. A lot of times you're recommending an ordinance, or you're recommending or you're adopting a resolution. That's easy enough, but sometimes you might be actually providing some direction to the staff to do something or to bring something back, and that direction should just be clear in the form of a motion, so that they bring the right information back to you. Unless specified by other rules, if we have a local, there's some rules specific to the council, a majority of a quorum is sufficient to adopt a motion. So right now the quorum is 5 because all 5 of you are here, so a majority of that quorum would be 3. Sometimes you may have a legal conflict of interest. That's a higher standard than just conflicting yourself out because you're abstaining. And if you do have a legal conflict, then the member who has that conflict, their vote is not counted towards achieving the quorum. Just something to keep in mind. The abstention has the same effect as a negative vote because if you have all 5 of you here and one of you abstains, your vote counts towards the quorum, so you still need the 3 votes to pass that item. So abstention, it has a different purpose than obviously voting no. Maybe you're not sure how you want to vote, or you don't think that the proposal merits voting it no, and so there might be a different purpose. But for voting purposes, the abstention has the same practical effect. And a commission member can change his or her vote up until the time it's actually announced by the chair, the final action. Okay, the motion passed, the motion failed, and thereafter it should be with the approval of the full commission to change your vote. Here, I throw a couple of examples of different types of motions you might want to keep in mind, and also Mr. Lynn's handed out a sort of a sheet of of different types of motions that you might be making during the course of your proceedings. A couple to discuss really are calling the question. That's just if you've discussed something thoroughly, you think you've discussed it thoroughly, someone can call the question and you can go right to the vote unless someone objects. But it's not to be misused for the purposes of cutting off debate. And also, another, just so we're clear, if you have a motion on the table and you want to amend that motion, the amendment itself requires a majority vote. There's a couple of distinctions here I wanted to talk about: reconsidering an item and rescinding an item. You may take an action on an item and at that same meeting think, well, I want to change my vote or I want to talk about it more. If you want to do that at the same meeting where you already considered the item, someone can make a motion to reconsider the item. It would have to be by somebody who voted in the prevailing side. If the action has been adopted and the meeting has been adjourned and a subsequent meeting you want to bring that up, then that has to come in the form of a motion to rescind the prior action. And again, the Roberts rules are a little bit silent on who can bring a motion to rescind. Our opinion is it should also be from someone on the prevailing side. Otherwise, you just keep bringing things back up over and over again. The Roberts rule speaks of tabling an item. It's a little bit antiquated, especially here in Glendale. What we typically do is either continue it or take it off the calendar. So if you want to keep something under consideration, but you don't want to finish it at that meeting, you just continue it. But if you're done with it and there's no reason to proceed, then you take that matter off calendar. And then obviously a motion to adjourn, I think you know what that is. So that's briefly Brown Act and parliamentary procedure. Again, our goal here is just to get you familiarized with some of the terms and some of the pitfalls. Obviously, if you have any questions about something on either of those two fronts, you can ask Mr. Lenz, you can ask me. We're here to provide assistance.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Were there any questions? Thank you.
Next, item 3B, electric reliability indices. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh. We have a request to speak on item 3A3. Mr. Herbert Milano.
Thank you very much. Good evening, commissioners and staff. My name is Herbert Milano. I want to address the issue of the Brown Act, inasmuch as I've had some experience speaking before the commissions and the city council. I think I've spoken at least 400 times in the last 8 years. So I'm a frequent speaker, and to that regard, I want to at least give you my opinion of what I have found to be some of the deficiencies as it has been practiced in the past, not necessarily by this commission, but by others. The objective, I think, of California law is to bring about transparency and to bring about the type of public awareness that would allow us to say, for example, if I had the information that is before you, and if I were to read it and understand it, would I be able to make an intelligent, informed decision, right, as if I were in your position, given the information? And the state of California, in addition to the Brown Act, gives us also the California Public Records Act, which permits the public to request information, any type of information that has to do with public policy, so the prior records or current records that are under consideration. The problem that we have is that generally the city attorney has up to 14 days and then an extension of that in order to be able to release the records. So oftentimes by the time an agenda is made, we necessarily may not have the information available for us to be able to get all the background information. With regard to this commission, the issues that I generally found was with regard to the capital improvement fund and the transfers that have been made in the past from this commission to the general fund, or the recommended amounts to the general fund, where I would try to find information that would corroborate and say, was this decision made in an informed way, right? Did you have information accessible that would allow you to make an intelligent, informed decision in the recommendation to City Council? So there's a time lag there. And so having access to information that you have on the web would be very beneficial to the public. Now, the law allows us to have 72-hour advance notification. But we have a problem. The problem is that we have the weekend in between. So if information is not accessible to us on a Saturday or Sunday, in effect, what we have is a reduction of this 72-hour, because in practice, we are then disallowed from the ability to be able to ask for additional clarification or information. So if I were to read the same information you have, but staff is not available on Saturday, and sometimes they're not available on Fridays because they have every other Friday off, I find myself at a significant disadvantage. So if we were to keep the spirit of the Brown Act, we would have the agenda items published, 3 24-hour periods. That does not include the weekend, but it's not practiced in Glendale. In other words, the spirit of the law gives us 72 hours, but the practice is not. And I think that is contrary to the objectives of what the Brown Act actually had in mind. Now, the other practice that I've seen in City Council, not necessarily here, is the use of BlackBerries. And you see the councilman looking over information, and the suspicion that we have is that information is being transferred, either by a third party or between them on that. And I hope that the city attorney would discourage or recommend to the council to discourage the use of BlackBerries or similar type of texting that is taking place during a meeting. The idea is that we are provided with an opportunity to express our opinions on an issue, and then we're giving another opportunity during oral communications to be able to present something that we hope you would consider in the future. But oftentimes what I find is that the oral communication is I leave and there is no information, no follow-up, no questions asked, not even a clarification to say, would you like us to reconsider that and move it into the agenda? Nothing. And the practice is that their commissioners are so scared to say anything during oral communication that they say absolutely nothing. And the objective really is to say, look, you cannot make decisions based on an item that is brought during oral communications, or discuss it to such an extent that you no longer need to discuss it. And so I find that oftentimes the interpretation is way too strict, and we are left out there, blowing in the wind, thinking, I need some kind of feedback that you heard me, that you're responding to me, that I actually connected with you. So it is my hope that you take a broader view of the opportunities given to you by the Brown Act and the California Records Act. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments, Mr. Milano, and perhaps in keeping with what you just said, it would be useful if your suggestions were evaluated by perhaps the city attorney's office in terms of whether it has some utility in this city's policy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just briefly, I think we try to get the information out to the public. I would, as soon as it's available, to go when it gets to a commission or when it gets to the council, it's made available to the public. I will tell you that the 72-hour period, it's really an opportunity for the public to get that information. Any information that you are getting, the public is getting. So the one thing I think I would object to is that somehow the commission is getting more information than the public. That's not true. It's always there's no more. If there's additional research that any member of the public wants to do, they have the right to do that. But there's no in no way is a commission, any commission, getting more information on a particular item than the public has. So that's all we can tell you. And we do the opportunity is there for people to ask for additional information, and we do comply with the Public Records Act in a very diligent manner. So.
I didn't think the issue was so much that we were getting information the public wasn't getting as the timing of the information. Yeah. I think that was the concern that was expressed. I don't know if weekends are really a problem for the public or not. Apparently they are for some members of the public who are willing to speak out. So whether it is for others might be worth looking into.
Part of it, too, would actually be a policy call of each commission to look at if they want to get their information sooner than the 72 hours. So, thank you.
All right.
Next item, number 3B, electric reliability indices.
Good afternoon, President Miller, members of the Commission. Ramon Abueg, Electrical Services Administrator. During the month of August, we had 4 primary outages. 2 of those outages, unfortunately, we couldn't find what caused them. We were able to restore the feeders, and the outage didn't occur. We suspect it was something intermittent. We had one outage, what I would consider a pretty big outage. We had one feeder that serves a lot of customers, about 3,500 customers. That went out on August 3rd, and that's due to a cable failure. We do have a cable replacement program, but we're not catching up as frequently as we want to. So we do have occasionally, we still have cables that fail. And again, that affected about 3,500 customers, and there's about 27 customers that were out of power for about 3 hours. Those are the ones directly affected by the cable replacement. We also had one outage that's due to a vehicle accident where it hit one of our guide wire that caused the wires to slap together, that caused an outage, and that affected about 143 customers for about 21 minutes. Overall, our 12-month rolling average for what we monitor in terms of our performance, the SAFE or the system frequency, system average interruption frequency index, of the 83,400 customers, about 72,765 customers were affected by an outage over the last 12 months, meaning that our SAFE or the index is about 0.89, which is less than the 1 that we shoot for. We want to have 1 or less. The system average interruption duration index, or the SID, we're averaging about 35 minutes for the system average, and our goal is 40 minutes, so we're still below our goal. And those customers that are directly impacted by the outage, which is measured by our CAIDI, we're averaging about 39 minutes of recovery. Again, our goal is 40 minutes, so we're within our goals. So we still want to continue to improve, and I think we are seeing a continuous improvement on our reliability. Any questions?
Quick question for you. If a squirrel knocks out a line, which happened in my neighborhood the other day or a couple weeks ago, is that reported on here?
Yes, it is.
No matter if it's one house or 2 houses?
No, I'm sorry. If it's a single house, the report that I sent to you or that I read here, we don't include that, but it is on the overall calculation that we make.
All right. So on this report, what is, if it affects 10 people, 20 people, or just so we have some idea of what we're looking at?
Yeah, all the indices reflected that.
Okay.
I just don't report the details of those. If it only affects about what we call local outages, where only a few customers are out. I don't report that to you, otherwise my list will be pretty long.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, I had a question regarding the underground cable.
Yes.
What is the useful life of a cable? You say 30-year-old, that's not that old.
Yeah, the useful life of the cable, the answer is it depends. Our rule is that traditionally, once we install things and 6 months later it stays on, we assume that it would stay there forever. But there's other factors related to that, and there's loading issues. If that cable is never subjected to an overloading condition, it never gets subjected to an environmental like flooding, the vault never gets filled with water, the useful life of that cable is almost forever. However, because of our loading, because of the infrastructure that we have certain feeders whose cable we tend to, during the summertime especially, we tend to we tend to put more load to it than we desire. That goes to what we call heating and cooling, expansion, and then when water gets in, it affects basically the performance of the cable. In this particular case, the cable we're talking about is the old cable, not the old rubber insulated cable. This is the high density polyethylene cables that are well known for what we call a treeing incident, where due to the heating, cooling, loading, then you put some water in it, it subjects itself to what's called treeing, which deteriorates the insulation of the cable. So the answer is 30 years, it's a good life. We can get 30 years, but ideally we really want to start replacing the cable that are 30 years and older, so we don't have to deal with it.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, that's too much information, but...
It's good.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Item 3C, water conservation update.
Mr. President, members of Commission, hello, my name is Atina Hartunian. I'm here to present our water conservation update. Find it? As you can see from our water production chart, our water production for the month of July was down 10.7% as compared to our base year. We met our water conservation goal for the month, putting us back on target. The same time last year in July 2007, our production was 3% lower than our base year. We did not meet our 10% water conservation goal in July 2007. This is definitely a step in the right direction, and we hope that it does continue in the following months. Our recent outreach efforts, I won't go through all the entire list, just touching on a few important ones. We issued a press release on meeting our target on August 14th, and we are encouraging yet still more conservation from our customers, and the Glendale News Press did cover that release. We had our second Tri-City meeting and reviewed the policies and procedures of our neighboring cities and how we can work together on our outreach efforts. We mailed out our August issue of the Source newsletter, which contained a lot of information on watering, landscape information, and tips for inside the home for water conservation. We followed that up with an issue of the City Views that included the same type of information. We have developed a water calculator for our website where our customers can input their household water usage information and compare it with the Glendale average. And as soon as they submit it, then the computer kind of analyzes their usage compared to the average and provides tips on how they could reduce their water usage. And Burbank and Pasadena are also going to take advantage of the water calculator. And we are currently printing water conservation bill inserts for inclusion in the mid-September through November bills, and developing on how to read your water meter brochures, and for all customers where we're kind of teaching them how to read their water meter and how to record their usage every month and see how they're doing and how to set their goals. Calls have been increasing for our Smart Home Water Survey program. We have had over 100 customers call for scheduling a survey in the month of August. Some of our next steps include, definitely in the last 2 months, we've ramped up our efforts. So the following are some of our conservation next steps. We will continue to increase our messaging in the next few months, and we are working on a new advertising campaign with Burbank and Pasadena. We will include the conservation bill inserts that detail our water supplies and ways customers can conserve. We will be attending many community events throughout the city in the month of September and October, as well as hosting a customer service week in our lobby where we will distribute information to customers and also teach them how to read their water meters. Our October issue of the Source will be mailed out to customers. We're also developing water conservation 101 classes for all customer groups. These classes will teach customers on how to read their water meters, how to set a water goal for their household, how to time their landscapes, sprinklers, how to adjust them, when to water, when not to water. So these are definitely a hands-on course, a little bit more direct and directing customers on conserving water. We currently are offering our California landscape classes, and they've started up again. Our first one being this Saturday, September 13th, and customers can find more information online, and those classes will continue through November. And we also have a contractor on board for the Glorietta Park Conservation California Friendly Garden, and we hope to coordinate a ribbon cutting ceremony with the Commission sometime in October, and we will keep you posted on that. And about it, are there any questions?
Hi, yes.
Hi.
I have a question. I believe it was either the last meeting or the meeting before where we talked about possibly amending the water conservation ordinance, and possibly putting in some prohibitive uses, fines for prohibitive uses. So where is that now?
We are still working on it, and actually Craig Keenan gave an update last month. We are in the process of working out the different phases, and we'll be presenting that to you shortly.
I wanted to congratulate GWP on meeting the goal in July. Do we know how water is allocated among our customers typically for different kinds of uses? For example, for landscape irrigation as opposed to cooking. Do we have some kind of estimate on that?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. I'm Peter Kavunas, Water Services Administrator. We have approximately, as a rule of thumb, our residential customers, which make up about 60% of our water use approximately 60 to 70% of their water outdoors.
The reason I ask is I would think if we had that broken down in terms of usage, we might be able to target where we would get the most bang for the buck, so to speak, in certain sectors of water usage by educating people in ways of reducing water. For example, let's say 60% is used for outdoors, and that's the largest allocation of typical water usage, and we think that could be brought down by 30% or something by promoting xeriscape or something like that. That might help in creating some kind of targeted plan for accelerating the conservation effort.
Certainly, targeting the message to where the largest potential for savings is the best strategy. And I think a lot of what you've seen and heard from Atina, a lot of that effort is geared toward the outdoors. Some of the new messages that are coming out, a tool that's on the website already is calculating a reasonable water use for one's home, not only the interior but also the exterior of the home. Couple that with giving customers the ability to read their own water meter whenever they want to by providing them some education on how to read the dials of a water meter. We've now given customers the opportunity to read on a daily basis almost how much water they've used, and if they want to play around with it a little bit, water one day, see how much the meter spins, don't water the next day, see how much the meter spins. You can really calculate how much of the water use is interior versus exterior. So absolutely, and we take that message to heart in targeting our conservation messages.
Do we know then, do we have a sense of where the city would, for the minimal kind of effort, would get the greatest water reduction in targeting certain kinds of usages, or is that part of our effort, if you follow what I'm saying?
We strongly believe it will be in the outdoor landscaping residential use.
Okay.
It just has to be. That is the largest portion of our use, and that has to be what has the most give. We look at commercial, industrial users as being dependent on that, on the water they use to produce whatever it is they use the water in the process. So it leaves the residential, and within residential, the interior is fairly minimal compared to the exterior use.
That's my intuitive guess as well. What have we done to try to incentivize more reduction in outdoor usage besides the landscape classes? Are there other things we could do?
Beyond the list of outreach actions?
Right.
Well, please.
We have partnered with Metropolitan Water District and have upped our rebates for sprinklers, adjustable timers, and washing machines and dishwashers. So we are working closely with them. So we provide our own rebates through our Smart Home Rebate Program as well as MWD rebates to combine the two rebates for more of an incentive for outdoor.
Another question I have here has to do with the message. I talk casually to friends and people of various kinds around the area, and the topic of water usage will come up. And when I mentioned that we're in a rather tight supply situation, people are sometimes surprised. Now, I don't know that my acquaintances constitute a statistically representative sample of the population, but it makes me wonder, how do we know if the message is getting out? Any comment on that?
Well, we track our messages by the number of calls we get for our survey program. That's a great way of tracking if our customers are getting the message, because a lot of our advertising and a lot of our messages contain information for the survey program. So when the calls for the survey program go up, we know that customers are getting the message, as well as calls for water wasters. When we promote our conservation messages, we always at the end tag a sentence saying, please report waterways. So we have been getting an increase of calls for that. So although we can't measure exactly how much of our customers are getting our messages, that's why we try to kind of outsource different and use a different type of messaging, whether it's advertising, whether it's working with the news press, our own newsletter, our website, or just attending community events and being present and available to talk to customers. So we are utilizing different ways to send the message out.
I think the most effective indicator, though, is how much water is actually being conserved. And as you can see, in July we actually met the conservation number, but I think it has more significance than just meeting that number, because in July we continue to be in a significant drought situation. So to be in a drought situation in the summer and still be able to meet that, I think does give us the indication that the message is getting out.
Well, that's great what you related, and also what Mr. Steiger just said. I just have to state I'm a little bit skeptical, I guess, that the message is getting out to enough people, and I think maybe more could be done. And so I'm suggesting to you that we look at that. And in saying that, I don't mean to demean the efforts that you've already done. It's excellent what you've done, but considering what we heard from the person from MWD a couple of meetings ago, where we are basically seeing a depletion in the strategic reserves, I have the feeling that we need to try harder even than what we've been doing. So thank you on that. We have other questions here, and I don't mean to be dominating.
Yeah, on the subject of outdoor watering, I read in the paper that the City Council is considering artificial turf, and I'm not sure where that's at, and if the GWP staff is helping out on that initiative, and maybe it's one consideration, as Commissioner Miller was mentioning. I didn't see that on the list of outreach efforts that you mentioned. How are we considering that aspect of it?
We are looking into it. We are working with the planning department, and they are in the process of updating their ordinance and presenting that to City Council. So we are working with them. I think currently our ordinance does not allow for artificial turf, but they are considering allowing it for the backyard areas, and we are working closely with planning on
Okay,
that.
so your speculation is that the artificial turf ordinance will pass, but it's only for the backyard, not the front yard.
We're not sure if it will pass.
We don't know.
We're not sure. We don't want to say it might, but those are our recommendations, that if we are going to recommend artificial turf, it would be for the backyard at this moment, until otherwise if it's recommended for the front yard.
Or just for the audience at home, what is the specifications for the artificial turf? Are there certain types or certain parameters one has to meet before they can be installed?
That would come from planning, not from Glendale Water and Power.
The answer is there are, and that is being looked at in the planning department. GWP is not. We're working with planning, but it is planning is currently analyzing what would be acceptable and how much would be acceptable. There has been limited discussion with City Council on that, but that's still in the development stage.
Atine, and had a overall question. Are we aware of any local municipality who is considering mandatory reduction? How close are we to mandatory regulation reduction on water use?
I'll have Peter address this question.
And, Mr. Ibrahimian, this is a very good question. It also ties into the question that Commissioner Miller was asking, is about the message and how do people get it. You know, from our point of view, we believe we're getting the message out. Whether the message is being received is more on the receiver than it is on the sender, from our point of view. And ultimately, the message will have to be received when we go beyond voluntary conservation calls and we get into mandatory conservation. I think at that point, people will simply have to focus on it. I guess part of a human mentality is, you know, if people are saying please conserve, maybe you tend to think, well, if my neighbors do enough, then maybe I don't have to do as much. Sure, nothing happens if I don't do as much. When we move into mandatory, things will happen. And what will happen under the existing conservation ordinance is people will get fined for exceeding what would have been their baseline amount. The base year is 2006, so we're not penalizing anybody that's been conserving since. It's going back a couple of years before the drought started. We're asking everybody to, we would be asking people to cut back based on that baseline. So at that point in time, and when the first few stories start circulating about, oh, did you hear so-and-so got penalized and so-and-so got fined, in terms of moving into mandatory conservation, we work, as Atina said, work very closely with Burbank and Pasadena, try to be coordinated, because we believe the three cities are home and workplace for a fairly consistent population. We also have consistent weather, and so we believe in keeping a coordinated message. And all three of us are on the same tack that we get most of our supplies from Metropolitan Water District, and we need to key our message to what Metropolitan Water District says is the picture. At the same time, in a parallel effort, is to push MWD to have a good, complete assessment of the water supplies that they have available, so that they're not perhaps miscalculating what the real situation is. So the policy that we're all proceeding on is that when MWD says we have regional shortage, then we will move to mandatory. And we believe that Burbanks is lockstep with us, as is Pasadena lockstep with us. And so you'd have the foothill region as a region, which is, again, homogeneous in terms of weather, population, work habits, residential community makeup. It would be kind of a uniform message to everybody here, is we're all moving at the same time when there's regional shortage. When that happens, my guess is we'll probably have to do that next spring. Whether it's early spring or late spring, there's a lot of politics that go on at MWD that we can't, as a little city in the big picture, we can't really fathom, but there's a lot at stake as to when a call like that comes out. But my guess is springtime we'll have mandatory.
Are you making that prediction even if we're in a year of average precipitation in the source watersheds?
Yeah. We'll need an extraordinary year to not have.
I believe that Commissioner Abrahamian was asking about are there other cities in the region that are under mandatory conservation outside the three? Is that correct?
Yes.
Were there others? Are there others?
None that I know of. I believe everybody's on the same message. I can't speak as confidently for cities outside in terms of when they would call for mandatory. I can tell you that nobody has yet called for mandatory. Everybody at MWD has called for some form of voluntary conservation. That would be the MWD member agencies. Sub-agencies of those, and not every member agency, as you know, is a city. Some member agencies are wholesalers that in turn wholesale water to a bunch of sub-agencies like cities. So not every sub-agency has necessarily called for voluntary conservation. There are cities in Southern California that have not called for voluntary. Every member agency has called for voluntary, and nobody yet has called for mandatory.
I have two other items to bring up. I just wanted to thank Commissioner Yao for bringing up the issue of artificial grass. It was something that I was going to bring up later under a later agenda item here. I think that that's something that we ought to hear more about in the Commission. It might be useful if we were to make some kind of resolution or something suggesting to Council that artificial grass be allowed and that we allow for reimbursement of it. But I think before doing that, we need to be a little bit more educated about what the issues are. Why was it prohibited or inhibited in the past, if those are the right words? What kinds of artificial grass there are, which ones allow percolation into the groundwater with rain and so forth, what the environmental consequences might be, and perhaps we can bring it up again under the agenda forecast, but maybe we could have that as an item for the next meeting.
We'll be happy to do that.
Okay.
Work with the Parks Department to...
yes, right.
Parks Department can also help us since they have artificial grass on the sports complex, and they have had experience with that.
Okay. The other item I wanted to bring up is that we're focused right now on the immediate, near term, and in the last meeting I brought up that we seem to have, we do have a definite water supply demand balance problem that's long term, and whether that's being addressed in the form of a report or some kind of analysis that we could hear about? I understand this is going to take some time to do, but is that in the works?
Well, the answer to that question for us has been for the last probably 40, 50 years is if we need more water, we turn to MWD. So there's really not much more for us to do. We have looked at our local resources, as you saw the report. We will evaluate and make a recommendation specifically for recycled water and the investment it'll take and how we go about raising the money for recycled water expansion and a possible change in the ordinance to get us away from the condition that we're in now, which is anybody new has to pay to extend the recycled water system. We need to change that along with make an investment to extend the recycled water system. But absent taking our local resources to the hilt, which we're already on track to, then anything above and beyond that is based on what MWD does.
That's certainly understandable. The only issue is that MWD is another agency somewhat remote, and I think it would be useful for the ratepayers to hear what's going on over there. What are they doing? Are they planning on this issue? Do they know what we're facing locally? Oh, we had a Met representative come a couple of months ago, and I think he talked about what's happening this year and what we expect next spring. But I don't think we really got so much an indication of long-term planning there and what's going on. Or am I incorrect? I didn't really recollect that from his talk.
Well, we will certainly bring you MWD information on long-term planning for resources.
Excellent. I think that would be a good idea, and perhaps when we come to the agenda forecast, we could discuss that. That's all I have. Other questions from anyone?
Oh, you can't get rid of me that easy. I have a couple more items in the agenda.
Well, just a comment here. We have some requests to speak from the public on water conservation, and would it be appropriate to hear it now or until we finish 3C? I think it might be better if we hear it now. And one of these is a little bit ambiguous from Mr. Milano. Did you want to talk about conservation first, sir? All right, well then let's have you come up. And by the way, I forgot to say this before, but we're limited to 5 minutes in speaking, and I think 1 minute prior to your 5-minute limit, a bell is supposed to ring or something. Did it ring last time? All right. Well, I'll try to keep an eye on it. I'll let you know approximately when you're
I'm able to tell here.
Oh, you can tell?
Yeah,
okay.
I can tell.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Well, all right. Thank you. You do a very good job. I have to say that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, commissioners and staff of Glendale Water and Power. My name is Herbert Milano. I would like to, for a long time, part of the reason why I speak as often as I do has been to try to bring one concept throughout all the commissions and to the city government to start making policy from solid data and to create policies such that you can measure how effective those policies are. And that has been the overall theme. You know, disseminate the information that is effective, measure the effectiveness of policies, and see if what changes need to be made so that we move towards achieving tangible, practical goals. And with regard to the issue of water conservation, I believe that, and I have a preference not to have mandatory, a move towards mandatory conservation before we try other means of achieving the same objectives. I personally don't like an authoritarian government if we can move towards achieving things that are effective. And I simply don't believe that we have approached this topic in a way that could have really maximized the effectiveness of the things that we brought forward. I really appreciate, Mr. Miller, the whole concept of saying, let's approach this issue of the water usage, especially for single-family homes, for landscaping purposes, because we have way too many initiatives. And you have 30, 40 initiatives. You figure out, my God, what are you going to measure your effectiveness on? The whole key objective where you're going to be most effective is lost. And so if you were to reduce this whole thing to just one item and say, report to us next month of how well you did on this one single thing, because if 65% of the usage is landscaping, then let's put our effort precisely where it should be and let them come up with the type of initiatives that they would recommend. Because if I were to ask to say, look, we have the conservation garden, ask the question, what is the total water conservation that you expect if you absolutely have the most outstanding response to that program? What would it be? I don't think it would be very large, especially when you compare to other ways of conserving water. The issue as well with artificial turf. We get sidetracked into issues that are really not relevant. How many people out there will be able to afford, right, a fairly extensive professional, artificial turf? It's not a cheap thing to do. So yeah, there could be a dozen individuals, maybe 24 in the whole city, but it's distracting from the main objective of reaching significant conservation. If we have a 10% success rate in the past year, did that success rate come out of some homes that did a 20% reduction and a whole bunch of people who did absolutely zero? And that's really what you ought to know. I still believe that we need basic, simple information that tells the public how well we have done or where they are with regard to usage of gallons per day. Now, I would love to see all of you submit to us in public to see your water bill and see how you did from last year to this year. But I would really like to see that from this respect to the City Council. I'm going to request that for them to show us to see if it's all talk, and they're really themselves not participating in this process. I believe that we need to give the public some very specific and tangible objectives. If you have a single-family home, you should have an objective of, let me give you a number out of the top of my head, 300 gallons per day. And if that's a target, let people come to you and say, wait a second, I couldn't possibly do it because I have 3,000 square feet of front lawn and another 4,000 in the backyard, and it's impossible. But at least you initiate the urgency of saying this should be your goal. And if you're in a single family, a multi-family apartment or condominium, you should have some type of goal that says, look, it should be 200 gallons per day. Because if you don't have a target, then 5%, 10%, it doesn't hold. My other suggestion is the issue of how to convey to the City Council and to the public that new construction, right, that is being allowed are taking special steps to provide separate water metering for each individual tenant or each individual resident. I think it's an essential part in the overall strategy, because if people feel that we have, maybe 1,000 new condominiums showing up, and there is no urgency as far as new development, then they'll figure, why should I conserve, if we have so much construction taking place? But if the argument is new construction will use 20% less water than most people do, then it might seem more justifiable.
You have about a minute left, I think. Just
10 seconds left.
Okay, all right.
Yes, very well. With that, I'll wrap it up. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. We have another speaker from the public. Just for the record, I want to comment that I think we do have a simple measure, and that's the measure that you're showing of how much water we used last year versus this year and the conservation that's occurred. And I do want to indicate that the plethora of efforts that Atina showed us that she was taking was really partly in response, I think, to things we were asking in previous commission meetings. What can we do more to get conservation going? And I want to thank the staff for the effort on that. Our next speaker is Mr. Doug Caldwell.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Doug Caldwell, members of GWP staff. Been a while since I've been up here. Good to see you again. Just a couple of quick questions on the statistics of water usage. Has staff backed out the effects of weather? I know we had a pretty mild July this year and a pretty hot June, and that seemed correlated with seeing not much savings in June and quite a bit of savings in July. I think last year we had our real hot spell in July of last year, and it was pretty cool this year. I'm wondering if any of that analysis had been done.
The data that's been presented is just pure production, water production data has not been normalized for weather because it's irrelevant. We're trying to conserve use less water, period, regardless of the weather.
I understand. I'm looking at separating the effect of public actions in conservation versus what just happens naturally when people back off on their water usage, and to not fall into the belief that perhaps people are proactively saving versus just serendipitously because the weather was good. The second question I had was whether the heat island effect associated with artificial turf and other surfaces is taken into account in GWP recommendations as far as its usage, because you're going to get some feedback of additional water usage in surrounding areas and additional air conditioning because of the heat island effect. I don't know whether that's a significant effect or not in the grand scheme of things.
Any analysis that's being done is being done by the city planning department. So we're working with them. So I couldn't answer on that, but we can look into it.
Very good.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Back to our presentation.
We have nothing further on the water conservation item unless the commissioners have questions. Okay. Thank you. Absent any questions, the next item on the agenda, I believe, is an update on a Chevy Chase 968 reservoir and pump station construction. And I have for you 4 sets of photographs. And I would ask if the commissioners don't mind to share these photographs. They're in pairs of 2. And it's I'm being visually oriented. I assume everybody else is. So you have 2 photographs. One that shows the status of construction approximately 2 weeks after the last commission meeting. So this would have been late August, and that's the second photograph in the back. And the photograph in the front is the status of construction as of this morning. And what you're seeing in the older of the 2 photographs is a trench in the middle, and that's the trench that shows the piping that will eventually be buried underneath the north cell of the reservoir. That trench has been cut into the soil cement, which is at the finished bottom elevation of that reservoir. So after that soil cement was poured in place, a trench was cut, the pipes were put in. The pipes will take water in and out of that north cell of the reservoir. They were encased in concrete. That was last week. And then this week, you see what you see in the front photograph, which is the drainage rock being placed on top. What goes on top of the drainage rock is the concrete bottom of the reservoir. So we're finally seeing some shape in the reservoir coming up off the ground. You'll also notice on the left side of the photograph is the pump station. You see the 3 walls of it. In the earlier photograph, they're still in forms. In the later photograph, the forms have been taken off 2 of the 3 walls that are on the outside. So we're making good progress. We're still, in terms of change orders, I mentioned to you last time we have 1 change order that was to deal with the contaminated soil that was unexpectedly found underneath the reservoir. That change order was recommended to the city manager at just about $100,000, just over that, and a 31-day delay, which we believe was reasonable delay to award the contractor for the condition, given how long it took us to respond to the contaminated soil. There's 2 others, which, as I mentioned last time, I'm not in a position to discuss in a whole lot of detail at this point because they're still being negotiated, and those 2 will be will add to the delay. It's a question of how much, and we need to negotiate that. The issues relate to unforeseen site conditions. One was perched groundwater in the area that had to be drained before construction could proceed, and the other had to do with the extent of the base rock that was not exactly as the soils report showed it would be. So once we have those items negotiated and ready to bring to the city manager for approval, we'll bring you an update on cost and time delay impact of those 2. So that's my update on the reservoir. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thanks for letting us know about it.
Sure. And by the way, those photographs are off of our cameras. Again, I mentioned we have 2 cameras that are trained on the site. They collect photos every 15 minutes. They're on the website, so I check them from my desk every morning. I'd like to see how the project's going. And we intend at the end of the project to have a time-lapse photography of the whole thing and probably sum up the whole construction project in about 5 to 6 minute video. So it'll be kind of a neat documentary. But what you're seeing there is just simply a print. And if anyone has an interest in getting that link, please let me know. I'll be happy to send you an email with that link so you can watch anytime. The nighttime photos are very boring. They're all black. So. Next item on the agenda is a water supply report, and you have in front of you the report with the production data from July. We don't have the August data yet. As Atina mentioned, you will notice the front page summarizes the past 6 years, and shows you this year. It shows the July production is the lowest in those last 6 years. I would observe that weather was cooler in July than it has been at least in the last 2 summers that I can recall. But from our point of view, this still represents an amount of conservation that is very much welcomed. There's really not much out of the ordinary in that report. We had a good month in terms of local production. We had some difficulties in August, which will show up in the next report, and I'll give you a little more information when we have the numbers finalized at next month's commission meeting. And the new addition to this report is the last page, which is a printed copy of the chart that Atina shows you overhead, so you have a sort of a hands-on copy of the conservation efforts. Any questions from the Commission?
Question on the recycled use. In the last year, has there been an increase in the number of users of recycled water, or has that pretty much remained the same?
There has been an increase in the number of users. Our goal is to add 2 new users every year.
And are we meeting that goal?
And we're so far meeting that goal. Our next goal for this year, we're trying to add 3 schools that are close together, and they're fairly close to the eastern portion of the recycled water system. And our hope is to get all 3 of them on recycled. And one of them has a fairly large field. I believe that's Hoover. Has a fairly large field. We're also working to get them a grant from Metropolitan Water District that would help them reconfigure their plumbing so that they can use recycled water.
And are the schools footing the bill, or somebody else footing the bill to tie them into the recycled water if that happens?
They are close enough to where we had money in our budget to tap them into that system.
Thank you.
It looks like there's no other questions.
Very well.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Next item, number 3D, Customer Service, the FACT Act.
President Miller and members of the Commission, Tammy Vallier, Customer Services Administrator. Today I want to talk about the FACT Act, which addresses identity theft. And security of customer information has always been important to us, and complying with this act is definitely a priority. So what is the FACT Act? It's the Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act. It is a federal law that was passed by the U.S. Congress in 2003 to set standards for guarding customer personal information. This last January, new rules were put in place called red flag rules. And the red flag rules make businesses liable for protecting the identity and being liable for detection, prevention, and mitigation of identity theft. Certain organizations must be in full compliance by November 1st of 2008, and certain creditors must develop, implement, and maintain a written identity theft program. Under the rules, financial institutions such as banks, credit unions, and savings and loans must comply, as well as other creditors that have covered accounts. Because under the definition of covered accounts, utilities must comply, because we have ongoing accounts for personal, family, or household purposes. Our accounts are designed to accept multiple payments and transactions. And utilities are amongst the top 3 institutions for identity theft, along with credit cards and cell phones. Well, what exactly is a red flag? It is defined as a pattern, practice, or a specific activity that indicates the possible existence of identity theft. So basically, it's a warning sign that identity theft may be present. There are 5 red flag categories: alerts, notifications, or warnings from consumer agencies such as Experian, Equifax, or TransUnion; suspicious documents, that could be anything from an altered ID or inconsistent information; suspicious personal identifying information, It can be a Social Security number that comes back to us as being a deceased person. It could be a Social Security number that's been issued within the last 5 years, indicating it could possibly be a minor. It could be Social Security numbers that are similar or the same as another consumer in our CIS system. Unusual use or suspicious activity related to the covered account, such as frequent name changes at an address where there's repetitive write-offs or repetitive mail returns. It could also be noticed from customers victims of identity theft or law enforcement authorities. There are many procedures to detect red flags. There's verification of identity. There's authenticate customers, monitor transactions, and verify validity of address changes. The last one only applies to credit card companies, although Glendale Water and Power is prepared to deal with that as well. And what happens if we don't comply? Well, there's fines that are possible through the Federal Trade Commission after November 1st. We could have civil fines representing the degree of negligence or loss of funds for a consumer. And the Federal Trade Commission recently announced that further details on punishment for noncompliance is forthcoming. Where do we begin? Well, actually, Glendale Water and Power began about 10 years ago, prior to the act even being passed. We do authenticate customers. We do verify identity. So we do think that we are ahead of the game. But we have put together a privacy committee as recommended by the American Public Power Association, and that will consist of the senior management. Privacy officer needs to be appointed, human resources, including our trainer, our information technology group, customer service, and accounting, which will include representatives from our billing and collections section. We will incorporate existing policies and procedures. We will also assess any potential vulnerability. And then, of course, it's important to comply that we document the actual policy and procedures, and most importantly, to train, implement, and, of course, adhere. Fortunately for GWP, the red flag guidelines are not so much about developing and implementing new controls, but rather taking the existing controls that we have in place and putting them into one consolidated and formal written policy. So again, we're ahead of the game. We're in a good position to meet the deadline of November 1st. Additionally, we will be meeting with SCAPA members to discuss consistencies among the utilities and some of the issues that they may be dealing with. So this is just a broad overview of the act that you may have heard about. It's been a lot in the news a lot lately, and just wanted to let you know that we're on track. Are there any questions?
Thank you for the presentation, Tammy.
Item number 3E, Information Services. Information Services Overview of the North Star Program.
Good evening, President Miller and members of Commission. I'm Michelle Nall, GWP's IT Applications Analyst, and I work for the Information Services section of GWP. I'll be giving a presentation about our new North Star system, our customer information and billing system. But first of all, what I want to do is kind of go over what an overview of what GWP Information Services does. Okay.
We'll start at the beginning.
I apologize. Okay. First of all, what I want to kind of go over is what Information Services section does within GWP. We support all the hardware in GWP as well as the application support, and we also provide the data reporting and research for GWP as well as other city departments. In our hardware support, we service and maintain about 31 servers, 338 computers, and 127 printers throughout GWP. For our application support, we have several applications that we support. These are the Harris modules. And within the Harris modules, we have the Northstar, which is our customer utility billing information system, eCare, which is our online website where customers make payments and view their billing information online. Our MCare, which is our wireless mobile service orders and dispatching, and EIS, our executive information system. This is a system for a CIS for our casual users. The other applications that we support are eVision, which is our IVR, integrated voice response. This is where customers can make payments over the telephone or listen to information about their billing. We also support the Stencil system, which is digital voice recording, which is used by the call center, energy trading, and for our electric and water radio transmissions. We support Henwood, which is our energy trading and scheduling system, MS Project for our project management, and the FileNet system for the document management system of GWP. Also, for our information services, we provide the data reporting and research. We provide routine and custom reports using Crystal Enterprise. We also provide financial balancing and provide reports. We provide quality assurance reporting and data extraction and export file creations. Now, Northstar, this is what I'm going to talk about now. This is our newest version upgrade to the customer service utility billing and information system, previously known as PUBS, or some people might refer to as Harris. I'm responsible for the Northstar system and the 4 modules associated with it. The implementation and testing of the Northstar system started in September of 2007, and we are fully integrated right now. Just to give you an idea of the services and the capabilities of Northstar, the information system can bill a variety of different services. GWP obviously bills electric and water services. We also bill for all the public benefit programs and fees, as well as fiber optic services, cool care refrigerators. The system also bills for all the other city services within the city. So our sewer, rubbish, hazardous waste, industrial waste, our fire permits, and the paramedic membership for the fire department. Now, the Northstar system has a lot of functionality within it. So within the system, it has a billing function. So it does the billing calculations for all the customer service bills. We have an option to provide to our large commercial customers as a summarized billing. We also have a cashiering system within the cashiering system to take in customer payments, service orders. We interface with our meter reading Itron system to import the meter reads so we can bill them. We also provide many different payment plan options through the system. So customers can select to make their payments online, through the mail, in person, over the phone. We have a variety of credit activities as well. One of the main things that the customer service reps use is the customer history information. So we have a main screen where the customer service reps can view all the account information when a customer calls in for an inquiry. The system also has general reporting capabilities and provides financial reporting as well. Now this is our actual Northstar account gateway, and within the gateway, just move over here. This is our main screen. This holds all the information related to a customer's account. So as you can see, this is a little bit more Windows-based as we had in the past. The customer service rep has the ability to view It's more like Windows-based, where it has folders with the screens associated with the accounts on the side. There's tabs across the top where we can maneuver easily from one functionality to another within the system. Also, when a customer service rep wants to look up balance history information, they click on that. It opens up a tab which shows the balance history information. And they can easily move from one tab to another throughout the system. The system also has interfaces within it. It has there's these icons across the top that interface with other modules of Northstar as well as other systems that we support. I'm going to give you a couple of cool little features that the system has. For the CSUR, there's a thing we call at a glance. Basically, it gives the customer service rep information at a glance about that customer. They don't have to maneuver through the system in so many different screens to find it. They can view account balance, their due date, when they're overdue, if they have an active payment arrangement. It's a nice feature for the customer service rep. We also have this search feature. It's called Quick Launch, which allows the customer service rep, if they're unable to locate information within the system, all they do is type in, the first letters of what they're looking for, and it will bring up anything matching that criteria. So as soon as they select it, it will open that screen for them. Another feature that we have is logging of customer calls. When a customer calls in, there's a list of different call types that we have within the system that the customer service rep can use. So when a customer service calls in, based on the reason they're calling or inquiries, we can keep that information stored in the system and log when they called, what time they took the call, and all the details related to that specific customer. So it's a good historical information, so when the customer calls back, we can look up that information. Now, I had mentioned before there's this toolbar right here with the different interfaces, so I'm going to kind of go over what these interfaces do. They click on these icons. So within those icons, we have a help screen, an activity calendar, the capability of reprinting a bill or viewing the bill, e-care, so we can view the website. There's an interlink to the FileNet, our document management system, and GIS is a future interface that we have with the system. So the help screen is basically it launches from any screen to assist the customer service rep with information about that screen and its functionality. This is the activity calendar. This is account specific, and it gives the customer service rep a good tool for a quick view of the customer's account. So when they were billed, when the payment was received, maybe when they had an e-care visit, when their meter was read versus when it was billed. So it's a really good tool, to look up account information at a glance as well. Also, we have an interface with our bill print and mail outsourcer, so we can actually view the bill that the customer is receiving, and we can also reprint it if necessary. We have another interface, which is a really great tool for our customer service reps, is FileNet. As soon as we click on this button, it launches. It goes into FileNet. It does its search in our document management system, and it will pull any documents related to that customer. So whether it be correspondence that was sent out, their application. So it's a good feature without having to go to a manual file and pull that information out. It also has a link to our e-care, our online website. So the customer service rep can help customers guide through the website if needed. This is our support activities. I supervise a staff of 3 who support and maintain and provide financial and general reporting of the Northstar application and its modules. Here are some of the things that we are responsible for on an ongoing basis. The table setups, within the background of the system, there's thousands of tables that are set up in order to bill, to calculate a bill, to make sure the rates are calculating correctly. Any information that is in there, there's tons of setups in the background that have to be maintained. We're also responsible for rate administration. So anytime there's a rate change or an increase in rates, both GWP and city services, we need to test those new rates within the system. We have a test database that we test the rates, and then we deploy those into the live system. But we make sure that we test those new rates thoroughly before they are implemented to the live system. We're responsible for the user security. We also are responsible, we write specifications for modifications to the system to increase the efficiency for the end user. So what goes along with that is testing. We do a lot of testing. So any modifications, rate changes, requests from the customer service department that they want changes to the system, we have a test database that we do all the testing in and make sure it's thoroughly tested prior to it being deployed to the live database. We're also responsible for version upgrades, branch patches, reporting bugs if there's system bugs. We maintain all the interfaces associated with the application. We are also responsible for all the month-end closing. So we have to make sure we balance the error on the cash at the end of the month, and we report that information to the finance department. We monitor the system to make sure there's a good response time for the end users, as well as provide customer or end user support for those customers. This screen, I just want to give you kind of a more visual overview of the hardware that it takes to support the North Star application and its modules. We have our main database server, and we have our applications that we support, as well as our web application, our teleworks. We also back up our system daily to backup tapes, which are shipped off-site, and we have a test database server, as well as a full redundant backup system that's stored off-site at our yard for disaster recovery. So, in a nutshell, this is our new system, and this concludes my presentation of the North Star system. So if you have any questions.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I just have a quick one regarding security and privacy. I mean, utility information is not as sensitive as medical information, but in news there's some news about people, or in hospitals, people having access to celebrity files, and they're looking at celebrity information. So what is the city doing with this type of system to secure or safeguard the privacy of its citizens' utility information?
We recently implemented a modification to the system that blocks all the Social Security numbers on the account gateway. So as soon as a customer service rep enters that new information for that new customer moving in, it automatically blocks the Social Security and the driver's license information once it's verified by Experian.
But are you ensuring that only the people who have access to, or who has the right access to the users will have the access, and not anybody can have access? Or is the system allowing any GWP staff to have access to any customer's information?
Currently, I mean, we administer the security on that system, and I know Harris, the Harris Computers, which is the software company that we have, they're going to be implementing, it's one of the version upgrades, an encryption. So it encrypts all the information in the background and in the database, so that information is not. Maybe
I
Craig
can help clarify. As far as general security, each GWP employee only has access to the data that they need to do to specifically perform their job function. And so, like the tabs that Michelle showed across the top, an employee doesn't automatically have access to the whole system. Again, they have limited access only to what they need to do to complete their job function. And that Michelle was starting to enter into some of the other security features as far as the encryption on socials, driver's licenses, checking accounts. As soon as that data is entered and the rep moves to the next field, that data is automatically encrypted and gone. And so those are our newest steps to help safeguard customer information.
And do you also keep a log of the people, the users accessing customer information, so that if there's an issue, if we get sued or something, can they go back and see who accessed
In our current system, yes. In our prior system, no. So anytime anything is updated, altered in any way, deleted, added, it's automatically, it shows what the data was before, what it was after they changed it, who changed it, when they changed it. It's a massive log in the system, so yes.
Great. Thank you.
Is your database relational in the sense that if a customer called in with some concern, let's say the power went out or he noticed a earthy, musty odor to the water, that a representative would be able to see how many complaints of that nature had occurred in the area and be able to draw it up?
You mean from complaints logged or called in by other customers?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
That would be more like an outage management type system, which we don't currently have yet.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just kind of update that a little bit. We have certain calls that we tally, and so immediately that customer service rep would not know, we received 50 calls this week on that complaint. However, the senior and supervisor for those sections do regularly look at the tallies, and they do know what the common themes are throughout the month. So at the end of the month, we look and say these are the 3 most common calls that we received for the month of September. So I think, does that...
Yes, it does. I was thinking that if your database was such that you could put in queries, and of course to do that now would probably be some additional capital investment that maybe wouldn't be needed. But if you could do that, you would know, let's say that you got a call in about an earthy, musty water quality issue, and then suddenly later in the day you got 20 more, and it was all in a particular area. You might be able to notify somebody, and they could trace it to an operational decision that could be rectified right then.
And we can run certain queries. So, for example, we have a new call that we're putting in called water waster. So the first call that we get where somebody says that somebody's wasting water, we would put in a water waster call 1, there's a 2, and there's a 3. We could, at some point, run a query and say, okay, how many water waster 1 calls did we have? So, yes, there are queries based on the call log that Michelle showed you earlier.
So that's something that can be programmed?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, very good. Thank you.
To add on to President Miller's comment, with the relationship aspect of it, when, for instance, an account manager, let's say, worked with a customer and there's certain activities involved, and are there ways where they can log the activities so anyone pulling that account up will be able to see all the activities related to that account?
Well, that's what the call logging system is the supervisors, anybody answering customer calls should be logging their calls on what the call was about, and providing the details. There's within the calls, there's note fields, so they can type unlimited information regarding that call. And then if it were to progress to another call type, it should be logged again by that supervisor or manager. So we can record and track the information. And as Tammy was saying, we have the capabilities through our data research and our crystal reporting. We can pull that data and provide any type of information that's in the system.
Right. I noticed there's a historical data as well. How many years will we keep historical data? I understand this is new, but how many years will we be?
Well, right now we have probably about 9 years of historical data in the database right now. Yeah, which if we do any purging of the data, it will probably be more based on the balance history information, reading information. That would be the information that we purge. Those are the larger tables within the system. All the call information related to that customer will stay there as for the life of the account.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation.
Item number 4, oral communications.
We have a item from Mr. Herbert Milano, but I don't see that he's present. So I guess if he comes back in the next couple of minutes, we could have him come up. Were there any other oral communications? All right.
Okay, on item number 5, old business.
Please.
Mr. Miller. The old business regarding the billing of bills in gallons, and I think Ms. Valier had some comments in the past about that, and it was I think recently in customers' bills. So I was wondering what kind of reaction has customers gotten, or some kind of feedback, if you heard from your customer services rep about the conversion to gallons in our billing system now.
We've actually had some good comments about the gallons, but we have had not so good comments about the chart that we added to the back. Because when we converted to the chart, we took away the daily average. So we are in the middle of doing a complete bill revision that Atine is helping us with, and we do plan to put that back in. We hope to have everything, the chart and the daily average, combined. We didn't do an immediate conversion just because we knew we have the water conservation ordinance that will impact the bill, and we have something else. I'm sorry, I can't remember what it is right offhand that's going to impact the bill. So we're going to be doing a lot of bill revision, so we thought we would just pretty much start fresh.
Are you going to leave the gallons conversion?
Yes, we'll leave the gallons, but as far as feedback, that was done all at once, the gallons and the chart has had negative comments.
Were people more receptive to it? They thought it was a good idea and it helps them conserve, or what did they say about it?
As far as the gallons, just that it helped them identify with how much water they were using.
So hopefully, I was assuming in the future we can track these things so that if it does help recognizing that they're seeing such a big number now. Before it was, let's say, 100 cubic foot, but now they see like 15,000 gallons. So having such a big numbers, I hope would help people to conserve, because now they realize that these numbers are big, and it's not just 22, it's 15,000 gallons. So hopefully we can maybe track these calls and maybe start tracking when we implemented the gallons conversion into how our conservation measures are lining up because of that. Is there a way we can do that?
I can tell you that the number of calls has not been significant. We track so many items that if we see that there is a large interest in one area, then we start to tally it and track. At this time, it has not become such an issue that we would be tracking that.
Yeah, I'm not thinking.
Maybe 4 or 5 calls.
Yeah, I guess I'm not getting clear that it's not tracking the calls, but rather than tracking as part of our conservation measure. So are people actually conserving once we start converting these bills into gallons? So can we maybe designate a baseline from when we started the bill conversion to gallons to the actual conservation that was taking place from then on? Isn't there a way we can do that?
Oh, I'm sure. Well, I know the exact date that we started the gallon conversion, not off the top of my head, but I have it written as when we actually started billing in gallons, so I can provide that to Atine for her tracking purposes on the success.
That would be great to see in the future meetings when you do have some comprehensive data that we can show that when we started that billing system changed, that it impacted the customer in certain ways. Thank you.
We can put it on the agenda forecast. Thank you, Commissioner Yao, for bringing that up. Were there other items of old business?
Next item, new business.
Any new business? I did want to bring up the issue of incentives to convert to zero-scaping. I think, I've raised that issue several times, but so maybe I should have brought it up under old business. But I'd like to see if there's some additional work that can be done there. Maybe we could include that for the agenda in a future meeting. Thank you. Next item.
Item number 7, agenda forecast.
I just want to note some things that were brought up at this meeting. We were going to talk about the artificial grass issue next time. We'll hear something about that.
Yeah,
Please.
and I think to do it properly, we will invite the planning department to give you an update on that.
I would expect that, yeah. Also, I wanted to ask about capital improvement plans. Are those being updated for water? Possibly. We had about a year ago they were working on it. Do they do it annually or?
Yeah. In fact, we have a budget presentation for the next meeting.
Okay.
We'll include that.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. And then when MWD develops more supply plans, we'll be hearing that, I think. Okay. And then the issue that Commissioner Yao brought up about the gallon conversion.
It doesn't have to be next month, maybe in a few months.
Okay.
Whenever they have
let's
data.
make sure it's on the agenda forecast, though. So, yeah. Yes. Okay. Other items that anyone had on?
And if we still have time next month, maybe we can add something about a new website training. Maybe someone can help us quickly navigate your new website, because I noticed there was a new launch of a website page, and it's kind of more difficult to relearn what we see in the past. So maybe someone can come by and help us, just go show us different features and what was new and how we can navigate the system.
We'll give you a complete update on the new website. We're proud of it anyway, so we want to give it to you anyway. So glad you brought that up.
Excellent. Any other issues for the agenda forecast? We've completed our agenda then, and we still have a few minutes to spare. I want to thank everybody for their patience. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The meeting is hereby adjourned. Our next meeting will be Monday, October 6, 2008 at 4 p.m. in council chambers. Thank you very much.
Take a picture.